So I love our scripture readers every week. It's my chance to meet some of the youth of our congregation. And today, I didn't even have to get intel for our scripture readers because it happens to be two of my youngest grandchildren. So Doc and Pearl, come up here. This is Doc Santino Mancuso. So my kids have a mafia hitman in the making right here. And Pearl, come right up here. This is Pearl May, and they're going to do the scripture reading together. Now, I will tell you a little bit about Doc. Is a horse camp guy. He loves to ride horses, and he's even this year did advanced horse riding camp, right? So what's your favorite horse to ride?
My favorite horse, her name is Tootsie, and I do horse camp at Tony Neal's.
So we all know Tony Neal, our old friend out there. So Doc's the horse guy. Yeah, you can applaud that. That's worthy of applause. He's really, really good. And, I always said I never get on anything that weighs more than me. And so that's why I don't ride horses. Now, Pearl has discovered Star Wars this year. And she's dove right in. She was sitting in my chair a few weeks ago, and she was sitting there just looking at the ceiling and no devices, no TV. And I thought, well, what's wrong with her? And so she's just looking at the ceiling, and I said, Pearl, what are you thinking about? And she said, the Star Wars timeline, which is pretty heavy, right, for those of you Star Wars fans. Who's your favorite Star Wars character?
Grogu from the Mandalorian series.
Somebody from the Mandalorian series. I didn't quite pick that up. Who is it go to? Grogu, I'm sorry. Grogu from the Mandalorian series is her favorite. All right, so they've got our verse today. They're going to do it together. Doc, you going first? First part of the verse? All right, here we go.
The Israelites sampled their provisions, but did not inquire of the Lord. Joshua 9:14.
All right, there we go. Joshua 9:14. Thank you, Doc and Pearl. Awesome. They've been working on that all week, and so that's fun. Grandkids are so awesome. Someone said they're God's gift for not killing your own kids, and that's probably true. I can say that's a blessing. We love them. So the Israelites sampled their provisions, but did not inquire of the Lord, is our verse today. And it really is the sort of sentence sermon. We're in Joshua chapter 9 today. And I've been loving this series. By the way, I hadn't been here, but I've been able to watch online. I'm loving watching our young guys get a chance to get up and show what God is doing in their lives and preaching. And so it's been really a lot of fun for me. And I like to read military fiction. Johnny Howard and some others have introduced me to some great authors around the world. And so that's kind of what it reminds me of when we're studying the book of Joshua. So, of course, it's not fiction, but it almost reads like it is, right? Because the supernatural elements are here, but we're really just watching this military campaign, and we're seeing everything that's happened, and we know that there's this bigger picture. There's this idea of blessing that God has promised, but then there's also this judgment and some curse that it goes in the same vein as well. And so all these things seem to be happening at one time. And today, if you're reading in your Bible, the little heading, which by the way is not really in the Bible, but someone kind of gives you these headings. And this one says in Joshua 9, the Gibeonite deception. Doesn't that sound like a Jason Bourne potential right there? Like the Gibeonite deception. I mean, it just kind of grabs you, right? And that's what we've been talking about. Every one of these, this miraculous crossing the Jordan River to come into this land of promise. And then you had the taking of Jericho, which I call the weaponized worship war, where God basically says, you just give me some praise and let me do my thing. And he did. You had the AI ambush, which has been talked about, and of course, the covenant compact from last week. But these are all generational blessings for the Israelites, but they're also generational curses and judgments. So you kind of have a classic story of the good guys and the bad guys. But then again, the more we dive into that, we realize that the good guys have a lot of flaws, right? We see that throughout the Bible. We like, the only thing that makes us good is because we claim God, right? Because we claim Christ as our Savior. We know we're flawed if we're the good guys in the story. And the bad guys, they're people too. They're people that have a history of problems, and in this case, it's all this idolatry and these false gods, and they've led them to some terrible decisions and terrible life choices, and it's in a culture, they have finally reached the place where the judgment of God in time is now happening against them. But they're people. They're people we know, if they knew something better, might have the opportunity to change their hearts and change their mind, which is exactly what we saw with Rahab, right? In early on in this series. She was a part of that culture. She had her own little brothel that she's running there, and all of a sudden she saw God for who he was, and she said, I'm all in. And not only did that set up what was going to happen in our story, but it changed her life and it changed her family's life. So you see this kind of back and forth that's going on, and it's difficult. It's difficult for us to look at the justice of God and somehow think, because that's a word that we see in our culture a lot, justice, right? We want social justice, we want justice. It's very difficult for human beings to exact justice because we can't see past, present, and future. We only can see past and present. So when we start talking about justice, we can only go about the facts and what we know and eyewitness accounts, and that's what we try to do to get justice. But God sees it all. He's outside of time and space. So when he starts telling us about things that 400 years are going to happen from now, and he's working in our time and space, we have to trust that he is that. He is God, and we are not. So as we're reading through this text in Joshua, sometimes it gets a little tough, some of the stuff that happens, and we think, man, this doesn't sound right to us. But remember, we're not in the seat of God. Only he is. And he's working all things out to his purpose. This last week, I got the opportunity, and I say that in air quotes, to do jury duty. And now, I don't know, how many of you have ever gotten the blue summons in the mail? How many of you? Oh, yeah, a bunch of you. All right. So you know what it's like, right? You get that thing, and you've been summoned. And anytime the state of Louisiana says you've got to do something, it makes you a little nervous, right? Because it's like, this is official. We realize this is part of our justice system. Every individual, including every one of us listening today, has the opportunity and the right to have a jury of their peers to decide their fate on whether they did something or didn't do something. And so we're a part of that system. Now, I got to tell you, when I was young, I wanted to be a part of this system. I was like excited about it. The first time I got that summons, I was the first one there. I was sitting on the front row. I was ready to stay for months if that's what it took. I've watched so many Perry Mason shows and Law and Order, Well, now things are busy, a lot going on. So when I get the blue paper, I'm like, oh, man. I know I got to do it. I know I need to do it. But I'm just being honest here, transparent. I didn't want to do it. So people, friends, other people are saying, oh, you can get out of that. You can send a letter. You can do this. You can do that. So, well, I know I can, but I really should do this because it's the right thing to do. And I didn't have a reason. A couple of times ago, I had a reason, and so they let me not do it, which was fantastic. But I didn't have a reason. I just didn't want to do it because I was busy. And so I was hoping on that Friday afternoon call, you know the one I'm talking about, right? You're calling in there and you're hoping that message says no cases next week. So what happened the last time Lisa had it? So I call in and the answer, and it said, thank you, goodbye. I'm like, what does that even mean? Thank you, goodbye? Is no news good news? Is no news bad news? Come on, state of Louisiana, tell me what I got to do. 2 hours later, I called back in. They said, you report Monday morning at 8:30. Oh, man, I'm at the Southern Lair. I'm doing my work. I'm excited about it. I got a few days without the podcast. And so then I was facing this thing. Do I do the right thing, or do I somehow last minute try to get out of something I know I should do? And I got in the car and I drove home that 6.5 hours with traffic, and I reported for duty. You go in there and everybody's sitting, there's too many people in one room, it's crowded. You're a little bit nervous about what's going on. I'd been through it before. You fill out your paperwork. I'm looking around the room, and it's amazing. Out of 200 plus people, and I'm juror number 229 if you're keeping score, I didn't recognize one person. I've been in Ouachita Parish 50 years. I didn't recognize a single person in the room. Get your instructions. They're going to go. There's a case going on. We'll come back. We'll tell you what's going to happen. Don't leave. Here's the bathroom, blah, blah, blah. And so I look, and there's a person that had been hiding behind a gentleman a few rows from me, and it was one of my dear friends from 40 years ago that had such a blessing on mine and Lisa's life in a moment when we were young and we were scared because we had a kid in the hospital, and she was there for us. And I thought, I didn't even see you hiding back there. And so when we got our first break to talk, she came up, we caught up, we visited. And I hadn't seen her in several years. She used to be a member here. And it was just such a blessing. And it put me at such ease. And I thought, you know what? I just said a little silent prayer to the Almighty. I was like, you always have things in store for me that I don't know about. Just little blessings and just little things. And after we had our conversation, people then recognized who I was. And I had person after person after person coming up and telling me what Dad had meant in their life, what our family had done for them. And I was just so encouraged in this moment that I didn't want to go to, that I thought about trying to get out of. And I thought, if you do the right thing, thank you, Almighty, because you're there for me, right? And that's when we look at these ideas of justice. And we have to trust that He knows best when He tells us what to do. And He does it all the time through His Word, right? So that's the background of the Gibeonite deception is what we're going to call it. And we're going to start with what I call the lie, because you can't have a deception without a lie. And the best lies are the ones that have the most truth in them, right? So let's see what these Gibeonites are all about, because this is very interesting. Let's start in verse 1 of Joshua chapter 9, if you'll follow along. Now, when all the kings west of the Jordan heard about these things, what things? All the things I just mentioned earlier. All these great battles, what God had done, miraculous crossings, Egyptians being drowned in the Red Sea. I mean, the word was out. There's some people coming, and there seems to be something very mighty about them. The kings in the hill country and the western foothills and along the entire coast of the Mediterranean Sea, as far as Lebanon, the kings of here we go with the ites, the Hittites, the Amorites, the Canaanites, the Perizzites, the Hivites, the Jebusites. It's a lot of ites. They came together to wage war against Joshua and Israel. So what we're seeing now is we've turned this into what we would call in modern times a regional conflict, which means that somebody gets powerful, and so everybody else starts joining forces and saying, we got to do something to take these people down. What they don't realize is they're fighting more than just Israel, right? I mean, we know that the commander of the army of the Lord has already shown up and says, we're giving the battle plans. So all these ites don't have a chance, but they're going to rally, right? And then here's a little wrinkle. Here's something a little bit different. However, when the people of Gibeon heard what Joshua had done to Jericho and Ai, they resorted to a ruse. I love that phrase, a ruse. You ever been a part of a ruse? Some of you do, you just don't know what that means. A lot of you have been a part of ruses, I can guarantee you that. They went as a delegation, so they sent some people in, and their donkeys were loaded with worn-out sacks and old wineskins, cracked and mended. They put worn and patched sandals on their feet. They wore old clothes. Sounds like my childhood. All the bread of their food supply was dry and moldy. Sounds like the deer camp, right? I mean, these people look sad. Then they went to Joshua in the camp at Gilgal, and they said to him and the Israelites, we have come from a distant country. Make a treaty with us. Now, this was the ruse. Some reason when I read this, I thought of it. There's an old Saturday Night Live skit back 30 years ago when it was funny, and not political. And it was called Unfrozen Caveman Lawyer. I don't know if any of you remember that. And the guy was froze, and then he woke up as a caveman. Now he was a high-powered attorney, and he always said, your ways frighten and confuse me. I'm just here. I'm just a caveman. I don't know, but he was really shrewd, right? That's what these guys are. We're just traveling in. We just heard about what happened. And we thought, we're going to go and make a treaty because these people are something. So they're just acting all innocent, right? So the Israelites said to the Hivites, this is the people, the Hivites, well, perhaps you live near us. So how can we make a treaty with you? Because they had been told by God, you don't make treaties with anybody living in the neighborhood. It's all bad. And I'm here for justice. And so you're going to have to trust in me. If you go against that, bad things are going to happen. That's what God has already told Israel. And so they asked the right question. How do we know that you guys are far away? Somebody should have pressed this point. And here's their answer. We are your servants, they said to Joshua. You know what this reminds me of? It reminds me of one of those congressional hearings you see, and they ask a direct question, and they say, I don't recall. You ever see that before? You know, you ask a specific question, but you get a very generic answer. We are your servants. We're cavemen, from a faraway land. So Joshua asked another specific, direct question, which should be done. Who are you and where do you come from? That sounds pretty simple, right? A faraway country. Who are you? Now, someone should have been taking notations and saying, we've got to get to the bottom of this. Instead, here's the answer. Repeat the same thing. Your servants have come from a very distant country. If you keep saying a lie long enough, some people are just going to believe it. You ever been a part of that? Well, I have. We're just cavemen from a distant country. And now look what they do next. Because of the fame of the Lord your God, we've heard reports of him, all that he did in Egypt, all he did to the 2 kings of the Amorites, and our elders and all those living in our country said to us, take provisions on your journey, go and meet them and say to them, here it is again, what does this even mean? We are your servants. Make a treaty with us. We're just innocent people. But they're not. They're lying. So here's what they do. This is next level lying. They're going to appeal to their senses. This bread of ours was warm when we packed it back home. See how they're appealing to the senses now? I mean, who doesn't like the smell of warm bread? Smell it. Isn't it great? This moldy bread, it was warm when we left. That's how far away we travel. It's almost like they're overdoing it. Don't you kind of see it here? The day we left to come see you, but we now see that it's dry and moldy. And these wineskins were filled, they were new, but look how cracked they are. Look at our clothes and our sandals that have been worn out by this very long journey. I mean, we left, we were on the cover of Robes and Sandals, and now look at us, right? Such a sad situation. The best lies are the ones that sound the most reasonable. This is a little insight into the evil one, by the way. He first pops up in Genesis 3, and we see him throughout the scriptures. He tells lies that look and sound reasonable. They're full of flattery. They recognize God. I mean, James said even the demons believe there's one God. They're willing to talk about God with you, right? They appeal to the human senses. They play to felt needs and compassion and desperation. And man, we want people, and we don't like seeing poor people and people in difficult situations. And so, man, it's hitting on all cylinders. These people need to be believed, but they're lying. And it's going against exactly what God said. Now, that ought to be a little wake-up call for all of us and how susceptible we are to lying. And I think the reason we're susceptible and we swallow lies is for 3 different reasons. One is sometimes we're just naive. We just don't want to believe that people will trick us. We don't want to believe that the evil one is really working against us. We're just naive. Maybe that's what was going on here. Sometimes we're just flat out lazy. I mean, someone should have done a little follow-up here, right? Maybe a little due diligence to find out if what they said was true. Instead, it's like, how far away are they? Couldn't we go look? Maybe sometimes we just have pride. Because we think, you know what? We're doing such good things and God is so big in our lives, we don't have to worry about the deception of the evil one. Pride. That's a tricky one. Better watch that one. When I was doing my jury duty, we had some HVAC issues down at the southern layer. There was a dripping going on inside the air conditioner system, and that's not good. I don't know much about it, but I know dripping is bad. Because water gets everywhere, right? So Lisa says, well, somebody hung a flyer on the door for HVAC, and they give all these things they're going to do, and they'll come check and do regular maintenance. I said, well, give them a call. This will be great. They can check it out. So the guy comes in. He looks around, and he says, not good. You got dripping. Yeah, we know. Well, I can do this and this and this today, That'll be $500. Okay, I don't know HVAC. Sounds kind of high, but okay. Some things need to be clean. That'll be $2,000. That sounds higher, but I don't know. And they're telling all this to Lisa. But you know what? That's just going to mask the problem. You really need a new unit. That's going to be $12,000. Now, I know that sounded high. So it tells all this to Lisa. And then at the end of it, he says, well, maybe you just need to, when your husband gets back, I'll talk to him. So he's going to mansplain her a little bit, which that went over big with Lisa. And so she's texting me all this stuff. And I said, whoa. So I'm watching the numbers, because I'm a numbers guy when it comes to money out of my pocket. And as the numbers got bigger, I was like, whoa. We might need a second look at this situation. Due diligence, right? And I got to tell you, I'm not the sharpest tool in the drawer for sure, but we've been burned a few times on things. And I said, you know what? Maybe a second fresh set of eyes would be good. I said, wasn't there a guy that worked on our unit down here once before? He was like a fan of the Little Duck Show and super nice guy. Do you remember that guy? Yeah, maybe he's in my phone. Call him. He shows right up. He comes in, hey, it's good to see you again. I remembered him when I saw him. And I said, but I told Lisa, don't tell him anything about what's already been said. I want fresh eyes. So he looks at it. We got a drip. Yeah, heard that. And he said, it needs to be clean. I thought, I might have heard that. I said, so can you do that? And he said, oh, yeah. I won't take it but just a little bit. Let me go grab some tools. I'll be right back. He comes in. 15 minutes later, good to go. I said, what about the unit? I mean, what do you think about it? You think it's got some life? Oh, that thing is great. Now, and here's the kicker. And then I said, well, how much do I owe you? I need to write you a check. And he teared up. He said, you don't owe me anything. I don't owe you anything. What your family and your dad have done in my life and led me to Christ is more than enough for me to help you in your air conditioner. And there you go. That's good. Well, so I said another little silent prayer. Same week. God, you're still in charge. You still know what's best. I'm still listening to you. Because every time I think that something can only be done one way, you show that there's another way, that there's something bigger. If I just trust you enough, right? Even in the little things. And that's what happens, and that's the response to lies. Jesus and truth are always the answer to lies in every single aspect of our life. That never changes. Let's look back at the story in verse 14. Now, Pearl and Doc read you the verse. The Israelites, and this is a sentence sermon. I could have preached a whole sermon on this one sentence. The Israelites sampled their provisions. What was that? Some of that moldy bread. Oh, yeah, moldy. And did not inquire of the Lord. They forgot the most important part. God is running this operation. They didn't ask. They launched out on their own. They trusted their own judgment. They were either naive or lazy or prideful, but they did it. And so Joshua makes a treaty of peace with them to let them live, and the leaders of the assembly ratified it by an oath. So now we're locked in. If we go against this oath now, God is going to be against us. That's what that means. Catch this. 3 days after they made the treaty with the Gibeonites, the Israelites heard that they were neighbors living near them. 3 days later. You see, truth always comes out, right? Satan sells you the lie and says, you know what? You can't tell this. You can't let people know this. You can't, they would think this. And as if he's not going to expose the truth on you if someone else doesn't. That's what he does. Truth will always come out. My mama used to say, the truth's the light, son. And she's right. It always shines. So now they know the truth. They swallowed the deception. They didn't inquire of the Lord. They didn't look around the neighborhood, and now it's out there. Look at verse 17. Here's the reaction. You got the lie and you got the truth. Here's the reaction. The Israelites set out, and on the third day, they did what they should have done to begin with. Send somebody Third day they come to the cities, all these cities that are there, and the Israelites did not attack them because the leaders of the assembly had sworn an oath to them by the Lord, the God of Israel. Now, at least they finally got something right, because if they had gone in vengeance, and hadn't you been there before when somebody burns you, and you say, well, I tell you what, I'm fixing to show you some vengeance because you deceived me. That's human response. That's natural for us to be vengeful. In this case, they held back, because if they had done that, if they had gone in there and said, I tell you what, you did this to us, you deceived us, and we're going to respond in kind and wipe you out, which they probably could have done, then they would have been under the same curse. And guess what, folks? So would we when we respond with earthly vengeance. James says we are ones to be slow to speak, slow to become angry, quick to listen, because we know that the power of God is at work. So they didn't double down, even though they were duped. That's a blessing. And then the whole assembly grumbled against him, because people don't understand. Because these were leaders. They should have known better. I've been a leader here at this church for many years, and I find that when you don't bring out honesty and truth in dealing with situations, you create more problems, don't you, Mike, Dave? It's best to be always honest. We messed up. We're leaders, but we messed up. Because the people don't understand. Well, I thought you're supposed to be leading us. Well, we are, but we're flawed good guys. We make mistakes. And here's the kicker. Everybody has to live with the consequences of mistakes. All the leaders said, we have given them our oath by the Lord, the God of Israel. We cannot touch them now. This is what we will do to them. We will let them live so that God's wrath will not fall on us for breaking the oath that we swore. Let them live, but let them be woodcutters and water carriers in the service of the whole assembly. So the leaders' promises to them were kept. So now you're going to be, the Gibeonites are going to be enslaved to the Israelites just like they were enslaved to the Egyptians. We created a whole new subset of slavery here. And it's not going to end well. It's a consequence. Joshua summoned the Gibeonites and said, why did you deceive us by saying we live a long way from you and you live near us? Now you're under a curse. You will never be released from service as woodcutters and water carriers for the house of my God. Why? Why would you do that? And catch their answer. This is amazing. They said, your servants were clearly told how the Lord your God had commanded his servant Moses to give you the whole land and wipe out its inhabitants before you. And they knew they were the wipeout. So we feared for our lives because of you. I thought about that. Man, when I'm living apart from God, I only spent one window away from him, but it was such a fearful life. I was afraid of everything. Afraid of truth. Afraid of people knowing who I really was. Afraid that I couldn't quit doing what I was doing that was destroying me. Fear. And that is why we did this. We are now in your hands. In other words, we have no independence to make our own decisions. We have enslaved ourselves now. How many people today are living in the slave of a lie because they won't let God deliver them? Deception. Do to us whatever seems good and right to you. So Joshua saved them from the Israelites. They did not kill them. That day, he made the Gibeonites woodcutters and water carriers for the assembly to provide for the needs of the altar of the Lord at the place the Lord would choose, and that is what they are to this day. Now you say, well, it's, it all worked out in the end. It works, that's good. No, if you hang around for long enough, this didn't end well. If you follow the track all the way through, these people in this region became the Benjamites, one of the tribes later, and this whole group gets wiped out because of sin, idolatry, and terrible sexual immorality. Just as God said would happen when you don't listen to me. You can't build on the promise and premise of lies. When you do, you will fail, you will fall, and you will falter forever. That's the truth. So if you're listening to this today and you somehow built your premise, your life on a lie, it will fail and fall unless you come to truth. And that's exactly what we see going on here. So what does all this mean to you and I? Well, the first thing is we have to trust God, but we have to verify humans, right? Because the evil one is at work in all things. We know he's there. Now, I don't fear him like I would have without Christ, but I know he's still active. And I know that there's a respect level there that we find out from in the book of Jude that I want to recognize and know that he's working in people's lives. And I'm a son of the Almighty God, but I'm not so naive to know that people are out there trying to do things to damage me and you and those that I love. It's the evil one. Jesus said clearly in John chapter 10 that he is the gate and he is the good shepherd. But he said there is one who has come to steal, kill, and destroy. He's here. If you follow my voice, the voice of the good shepherd, you don't have to fear death. You don't have to fear the things the world fears, but he is active and real. So trust, but verify. Number 2, we must combat deception with truth. We have to build on the right premise. You remember Matthew 7 when Jesus talked about building? And he said, don't build on sand. Sand is a lie. You start out a marriage, you start out a friendship, you start out a relationship, you start out in a new church, and you say, man, we had some issues at the old, and we're here now. And if you do it based on deception and something you're running from that you haven't given to God, you will only create more chaos, and that's built on sand. It will fall. Your marriage will find itself in terrible shape and terrible trouble, and all of a sudden you see it falling apart, and you say, how did this happen? Because you didn't build it on the rock, the truth, in our individual life, in our relationships. And then the last thing is you got to change your question. Back to my jury duty. So we sat there for a couple of hours. I'd have my visits, and the woman comes back in. And she says, I got an announcement, we're getting everybody back in here. And so you're wondering, okay, here we go. Do we go to the next level? Do we start picking people? What's going to happen? And she says, they just plea bargained the thing and you're all released. And everybody cheered and clapped in the room. It was exciting. I was like, wow, that's exciting. And so we're all, we get to go home. 2 hours, a lot of stuff into 2 hours. And so this woman I was telling you about, she walked over to me and to tell me goodbye. And man, it was so good to catch up and so good to see. And we talked about some old times and things. And she looked up at me and she said, the last time I was in a courtroom, you were here with me. And I didn't remember it. I've been in a lot of courtrooms through the years. You wouldn't think you'd do that for church work, but you do. She said, when I went through my divorce, it was so hard, but you were here. I'll never forget that. Oh, man, it just hit me in the heart. I said, well, I remember that. I remember how tough a time that was for you. And I looked at her and I said, that makes today seem not so bad, does it? She said, no, it doesn't. And we hugged and we walked out the door and we went our separate ways. And I said my third silent prayer this week, Lord, thank you for being there. Thank you for reminding me to do the right thing. And don't ask the question, why can't I get out of this? Ask the question, why do you have me in this? Because I'm here for a reason. And that's exactly where we are in our spiritual walk. If you constantly find yourself saying, Lord, I just can't, I'm living this lie. I can't. How do I get out? How do I get out? How do I get out? You need to change questions. Lord, why do you have me here? Is it that I haven't completely relied on you and I finally have to submit myself to you fully? Is it because you had me here for someone else to help lead them to something better? Is it just a moment where you can be there for someone else in the worst moment of their life so that a decade later you can be reminded that God is always there? That's what he does for us. And that's the lesson that I got out of the Gibeonite deception. Where are you this morning? Do you have a relationship with Jesus Christ? Do you know the truth? He came to set you free by his truth. That he died for you. That he was raised for you. That he ascended for you. That he reigns as your king for you this very day. And that he's coming back. the great resurrection, right? You can live a life of freedom. You don't have to live in fear and slavery. You can live in freedom of Christ. If you've never made that commitment, today is your day. It's a blessing for you. It's an opportunity. If you need to respond to the gospel of Christ, do that while we stand and while we sing.